Welcome back to the TweakTown weekly podcast. We've been a bit quiet for the last month. There's been a lot been going on, but we're going to get straight into it as we always do. We're not going to waste any time with the pleasantries. There's been a lot of movement in the industry in the last week. Qualcomm and Google especially, and Apple with their revenue announcements. We're going to start off with big news that just broke a couple of hours ago. Lenovo just secured Google's acquisition from last year, where Google acquired Motorola's handset division, Motorola Mobility, for about $12.5 billion. Lenovo has just purchased this back from Google for $2.91 billion. So we're probably going to see a move from Lenovo into the US smartphone market, which is a very large, lucrative market. Google are probably getting rid of it because they didn't really need the handset business because of their close relationship with LG, who makes the Nexus 5, and with Samsung, who currently makes the Nexus line of tablets. We might see Lenovo break into the US market with a new device, whether it be a Lenovo device or whether it be a Motorola device. We don't know quite as yet. But it'll be interesting to see what Google does from here, because they've still got the patents from Motorola, but then Lenovo have secured patents and licensing for the remaining patents that Google own. Lenovo is going to be doing the acquisition or the purchase from Google of Motorola Mobility with $660 million in cash, $750 million in stock, and the remaining $1.5 billion will be paid out to Google over the next 1.5 years. Google CEO Larry Page seemed to not be fussed about it all. He was quoted as saying, "Lenovo has the expertise and track record to scale Motorola Mobility into a major player within the Android ecosystem. This move will enable Google to devote our energy to driving innovation across the Android ecosystem for the benefit of smartphone users everywhere." So as you can see, Larry Page, obviously the CEO of Google, doesn't seem to be fazed by this, as you wouldn't. Because Lenovo are going to be building Android phones with a renowned Android handset maker, which was just previously owned by the people behind Android. So Lenovo, in my opinion, will most likely become a very close player to Google. And we've seen Samsung and Google just recently sign a 10-year patent licensing deal, which is what I think this is going to be. This is going to be part of it, is that Google seem to be not wanting to slow down. They seem to be cutting down the red tape around patents and licensing, which is how it should be done versus the way Apple does it. So we reported just over a day ago now that Google and Samsung signed a 10-year agreement, which sees all previous intellectual property or IP covered, as well as patents filed over the next 10 years. So it looks to be that Samsung and Google are working even closer together, where, say, 6-12 months ago, we would have maybe thought not based around Samsung building their own mobile operating system called Tizen, Tizen. If you haven't heard about it, we've reported on it, or you can just quickly Google it. That was going to be their own operating system. Even for me, for a little while, I thought maybe Samsung would move away from Google and their utter reliance on Google for the mobile operating system on the Galaxy range of devices, but it looks like they're working even tighter. And now the news that Lenovo looks to be working even tighter with Google, it could be a good thing for all parties, Google, Lenovo, and Samsung. Qualcomm has made some movements in the market as well. This week we saw the Snapdragon giant announce that it had purchased a massive patent portfolio from HP. Charles reported on this. So Charles reported that the purchase includes an extensive mobile patent portfolio that includes patents associated with Palm, HP's iPad device, and Bitphone. So it looks like HP will sell over 1,400 patents to Qualcomm, but this is at an undisclosed sum, so we don't know how much Qualcomm paid, whether it was hundreds of millions or billions of dollars or less than that or more than that. We don't know at the moment. But it is interesting that Qualcomm makes up about 32% of the annual revenue, 32% of its annual revenue from licensing patents that it owns. So it looks like this could just be more of a patent grab, where it's going to control more of that and license out patents to other companies for making their devices. Qualcomm had a few announcements this week. So obviously the first one was the large patent portfolio purchase from HP, but then they teased that they're working on an 8-core system on a chip. So we know that they've got the Snapdragon processors, which are one of the fastest chips on the market. A lot of the fastest devices on the market have a Snapdragon processor inside, usually a Snapdragon 800. There was a new Snapdragon 805 announced a couple of weeks ago, but now Qualcomm are rumored to be working on an 8-core 64-bit capable SoC. Now this would be interesting because Apple are the only company really that are pushing 64-bit in their chips in their devices with the A7 processor. But it'll be interesting to see where Qualcomm goes with this. I think Google phones will go further with 64-bit because of the specifications. Where Apple says, or Apple and a lot of Apple fans and people in general don't think the specifications mean anything with smartphones, but they do. If you're running a smartphone with a big camera, or not a big camera, but a high megapixel camera, high quality camera, or you do a lot of multitasking, or you might be recording on your phone and uploading something from an FTP server on your phone. There's 1,000 things you could be doing. The specs do matter. So a 64-bit processor with a 64-bit capable operating system could be a big thing. So the new processor is rumored to be featuring 8 Crate 64 general purpose cores, which will be designed in-house by Qualcomm, and they should be featuring up to 4 meg of cache and a clock speed of 2.5 gigahertz. So it should be pretty fast. Right now the Qualcomm system on chips come with Adreno 330 graphics. It looks like the new 64-bit capable 8-core SoC from Qualcomm will feature Adreno 430 graphics on board with a 500 megahertz frequency, which should give a boost to graphics and hopefully push through the 4K era for smartphones, Ultra HD. The new Snapdragon processor will most likely arrive as the Snapdragon 810, up from the 805 and up from the 800. And we should obviously see 4G on board, but there should be 2 models, one with the integrated broadband and one with an external telecommunications chip. So it just depends on where you're buying the smartphone and what chip that it comes with. Should arrive with low profile or LPDDR3 and LPDDR4 support. That'll be interesting. As for internal bandwidth, it should be pretty supreme with DDR4 RAM. It'll be interesting to see how good that is in benchmarks and multitasking. And finally, the chip will be made on Qualcomm's 20 nanometer process, which will be done at TSMC. So we should expect that to be announced maybe at Mobile World Congress in a couple of weeks' time in Barcelona, or it could be a couple of months away. I would say that it'd be the former. I think that we'll see it very soon, within the next month or two, but we'll see, I guess. And then Qualcomm also had another tease this week where we reported that Qualcomm Vice President of Marketing, Tim McDonough, had an interview with Trusted Reviews where he said, he was talking about 4K and how quick 4K is going to come in, but the company can't wait for 8K phones. Now, we're not even at 4K yet. 4K isn't even here. We're just getting to 1080p, or not just getting, we've already had 1080p and we're just getting good devices with 1080p screens like the Nexus 5, Galaxy S4, etc. But now we're seeing 2560 by 1440 panels, which we're going to talk about soon. Samsung have just quietly confirmed that they're going to be, or that they're working on that panel, which is an AMOLED QHD panel. But like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast. For now, Qualcomm are talking about 8K. So McDonough said, quote, "I think 4K is one of the primary things you are seeing from us. 4K is pretty cool because it means not only can you do 4K video, but once you can push that number of pixels and the chip has the ability to do 4K video, anything that is multimedia related, think about gaming, that gets better too." So kind of just teasing where we're going to be going with that. And then then he also added that that they've already sampled and they will have they'll have devices to launch in the first half of this year. And then he was just talking mainly about how many pixels it is on the screen and how the processor or the SoC inside needs to be quite fast. Obviously, Qualcomm has some incredible stuff that they've got, like we just said about the 810 processor that should be coming. An 8-core 64-bit SoC is going to handle 4K without a problem. And he finished off with, quote, "I once said that now we got to 720p on our smartphone screens, isn't that good enough? I was so wrong. 720p was the standard for what, 6-9 months? If they go to 4K, you kind of get to the point where it is, what can't they do? What I think would be interesting is when your phone will go from 4K to 8K. I think that too. Sure, we don't need 8K, but we don't need 4K, and we don't need 1080p. Apple aren't even at 720p. I think their phones are 640p, virtually what the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 are rendering at. So these phones might not need it, but the further that we go, the better the quality of the screen is going to be, but the more industries that it can penetrate. So think of it like Oculus VR and their Rift. Their biggest problem is that they need a high resolution screen. The more the high resolution screens get featured into these smartphones, the more chance that we're going to see a high resolution screen featured in new tablets, featured into Oculus Rift, featured into a lot of stuff like GPS units. You're going to be able to do a lot of things with 4K. PCs will most likely change because the screens will get cheap. If you can get a 4K 10-inch tablet, then you're going to get monitors cheaper. We're seeing 4K screens that are coming out for less than $1,000 now. That's impressive. So we're going to see maybe 4K come in very quickly. I don't think we're going to see the jump to 8K as quick as people think, but I think that's going to be the new enthusiast platform, will be 8K, but that might not happen for a while yet. We saw Microsoft didn't have much of an announcement this week, but they did see an increase in their sales on the Surface line of slates. They saw that compared to their first quarter of their financial year 2014, they sold just $400 million worth of Surface tablets. Compared to their second quarter of financial year 2014, they sold $893 million worth. So over double what they sold in the previous quarter. This isn't too bad, but even with those increased sales, which is over 100% more, they still posted a $39 million loss on Surface. So this is most likely going to count in marketing and advertising and stuff like that. But Surface isn't doing, I still don't think Surface is doing as well as Microsoft hoped it would be doing. Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 are doing as good as what they wanted it to be. But again, Microsoft, we're seeing a change of leadership, maybe a change of direction. So over the next couple of months and years, we might see, I'm hoping we see a change from them. That's all for Microsoft. There's not much more to really say there. We do have to talk. They did purchase the Gears of War rights, the famous third-person shooter from Epic Games. They purchased the rights of that, but we'll talk about that in a separate podcast for games that should go along with this podcast. As for Apple delivered record Q1 2014 sales with over 51 million iPhones sold, which is a lot. Compared to last quarter where they've sold under 40 million, the iPhone 5S has obviously helped them. Revenue reached $57.6 billion, setting a new quarterly record for Apple, and profits hit $13.1 billion, which isn't too bad at all. Definitely up from where they were last quarter, where they were barely pushing, I think, about $8 billion of profit. The iPod isn't doing too well. iPod sales really sunk in this quarter. iPad sales grew. iPad sales grew a lot because they reached a new record as well. Not only the iPad reached a record, but the iPad. 26 million units sold, but the iPod dropped from 12.7 million units in the same time last year to this year of just 6 million. It's a big drop. The stock prices are slowly coming back up. So we reported a long time ago that we could see Apple was coming into problems because their phones weren't doing anything innovative. But now we're seeing the stock prices have dropped from about 12 months ago from $700 a share, where they bottomed out at about $400, but now they're at $550. So they're slowly, instead of coming all the way back down, slowly coming back up, which is what they've needed to have had, especially to give investors and the public confidence in the company again. The company itself had its Senior VP of Worldwide Marketing, Paul Schiller, during an interview with Macworld, discussing how the Mac turned 30, which was just about a week or so ago. But he talked about the worlds of Apple's desktop operating system, OS X, and their mobile operating system, iOS, merging. So whether we'd see a touchscreen Mac, or whether we'd see more of iOS's design interface blended in with OS X, doesn't look like we're going to be seeing that though. He actually says, Paul Schiller was quoted, "We don't waste time thinking. We don't waste time thinking, but it should be one interface. How do you make these operating systems merge together? What a waste of energy that would be." It's pretty bad that Apple says what a waste that would be. So they haven't thought about it at all. Obviously, they haven't. Apple's head of software, Craig Federighi, I think it's pronounced it. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. The reason OS X has a different interface than iOS isn't because one came after the other or because this one's old and this one's new. Instead, it's because using a mouse and keyboard just isn't the same as tapping your finger. He continues, "You don't want to say the Mac became less good at being a Mac because someone tried to turn it into iOS. At the same time, you don't want to feel like iOS was designed by one company and Mac was designed by a different company, and they're different for reasons of lack of common vision. I think Apple's vision is lost. If they don't necessarily need to merge iOS and OS X, but I think that it needs change. iOS is too limited. OS X is great for what it is. I think Microsoft is slowly losing their vision. You can see Microsoft have shifted towards maybe competing with Apple too strongly, and they have lost their vision. So they moved from being a great desktop operating system, moving from Windows XP to Windows 2000, and then the complete mess that Windows Vista was. But they had the vision there, and then Windows 7 obviously came out. That was really good, and then they saw how much they were being hammered by Apple in the market, so they kind of thought, well, we'll make a touch-based operating system, and then Windows 8 came out, and we saw how much of that was a failure. So that's where I think it'll be interesting to see where Apple goes. Apple have gone back on their word so many times, it's not funny. Saying that it's a waste of energy merging OS X and iOS. I think we'll see something like that, maybe not in the next iteration of their desktop OS, but maybe in the one after, maybe end of this year. We'll see a tease maybe, and then next year I think we're going to see them release touch-based Macs. I don't see why they can't have a touch-based MacBook Pro. You know, we've already got tons of Windows 8 Ultrabooks that are touch-based. Something like the Lenovo Yoga 2 Pro. That's an amazing notebook, amazing Ultrabook. 3800 by 1800 display, 13.3 inch Ultrabooks. It's nice and thin. Core i7 Haswell processor, 8 gig of RAM, 256 gig SSD, touch-based screen for under $1,200, and you can get them at Best Buy or Amazon at that price. Where Apple's MacBook Pro is nearly $1,000 more and isn't half of that. So, pardon me, it'll be interesting to see where Apple go with that. Google acquired an artificial intelligence development company during the week called DeepMind for $400 million. Not many people know why they're going to be doing it, but Google, obviously acquired them for a reason. It'll be interesting to see where they go from that. But DeepMind's website says that it's working on general purpose learning algorithms, something that could help Google's research into automated vehicles, or their recent acquisition of Boston Dynamics, which is a artificial robot maker. They make robots like maybe dogs for the army and stuff like that. They can carry ammunition or supplies. So it'd be interesting to see where Google goes from that. I think AI is going to be a very big thing. People see it as this thing in the movies. You know, they laugh at it like the Matrix or the Terminator, but that stuff is more of a reality now than it has ever been previously. Before, it was most likely talked about in military sector. Now it's coming into the consumer sector. You know, people know about artificial intelligence, and a search engine that was born out of a garage now buys artificial intelligence companies. People should be eyes wide open about that kind of news. It's going to be interesting to see where Google goes with that type of acquisition. As we said previously about Samsung working on a 4K or Ultra HD panel, during the Semiconductor and Display Technology Roadmaps seminar, Korean media reported that Samsung confirmed that it's working on an AMOLED QHD panel, so 2560 by 1440. So we don't even have those kinds of panels out yet. We're most likely, I think we'll see that unveiled in the Galaxy S5, which is going to be Samsung's latest flagship smartphone that should be out pretty soon, or announced soon and released probably in the next 3 or 4 months. But the company also teased that they're working on a Ultra HD or 4K panel, so 3840 by 2160 on a smartphone. Now, if we have a device like the Galaxy S5, and we're looking at, say, a 5-inch display with 4K built into it, we're looking at 820 pixels per inch, which is about 3.5-4 times what the iPhone 5S is. Something like that is going to be amazing. Again, we don't need it, but it's great to have it. If Samsung can give us those devices for the same price as a 1080p panel, why not? I'm looking forward to it. I really can't wait. About a day ago, Lenovo announced that it's splitting itself up. So instead of being one giant company, they're splitting up into 4 smaller business groups. So this is going to go active as of April 1. The chairman and chief executive of Lenovo said, "Today, Lenovo is one of the most important and exciting phases in our history. We are the #1 PC company in the world. We are the #3 in smart connected devices, which include PC, tablet, and smartphone. And we just announced the intent to make an acquisition that will make us significant competitor in the enterprise space." So the 4 groups are going to be the PC Business Group, which is going to include the Lenovo and Think brands, the Mobile Business Group, which will be smartphones, TVs, and smartphones, tablets, and smart TV. The Enterprise Group, which is going to be servers and storage, and then we're going to have the Ecosystem and Cloud Services, which will include both Android and Windows operating systems. So it's interesting to see that Lenovo, as we just said before, just acquired the smartphone handset business from Motorola that Google owned. So now they own that. So considering that they are the number 3 in smart connect devices with PC, tablets, and smartphones, acquiring someone like Motorola Mobility is going to help them in the two ladders, the smartphones and tablets. So it's going to be very interesting to see where Lenovo are in 6, 12 months, 24 months from now. A, with splitting into 4 business groups, B, with the acquisition of Motorola Mobility. So keep an eye out for us. We'll be reporting on all of that as it breaks. We'll be on top of all of the Lenovo Google news as it hits. So be sure to check back. We'll keep covering that in podcasts in the future. And finally, before we wrap up, to keep this under 25 minutes, AMD announced that they have a new Opteron processor, the A1100 or 1100. It's actually their first collaboration with ARM, where it's based on the chip is based off of an ARM service system on a chip. So the chip is actually being rebranded to an Opteron processor. It has the codename of Seattle. It comes in two versions, a 4 or 8 core processor. Both of these are based on ARM's Cortex A57 design, and they come clocked up to 2 gigahertz. You don't really need that crazy of a clock speed for a server. Obviously, you want to keep them nice and cool as well because they're running 24 hours a day. The memory controller on board the Opteron A1100 is capable of supporting both DDR3 and DDR4 memory, which is another interesting bit there, but it's only based on a 128-bit bus. But the reference platform that AMD are pushing out can support up to 128 gig of registered DDR3. It'd be interesting to see where, again, there's a lot of interesting stuff that's happened in the last week. It'd be interesting to see where AMD go with the new Opteron, being their first collaboration with ARM, where it's not based on their own tech. We should see samples of this coming out in March, but the company actually predicts that ARM-based solutions will occupy 25% of the server market by 2019. So again, that's a big part of it. Is AMD are seeming to move away from what they're used to doing, is having their own Opteron processors, and AMD are very strong in the server market, but Intel obviously have the consumer market wrapped up around their little finger. But they're stopping their innovation. We're seeing a real brick wall that we're hitting in consumer CPUs because AMD can't compete. But using an ARM-based SoC, we might see AMD branching out and doing more interesting designs, something that maybe Intel hasn't thought of or Intel can't do on large scale. No one knows right now. But it'll be again, probably use the word interesting about 40 times during this podcast, but it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. Thanks for listening. Just a quick wrap up on the week. This is our first podcast for the year. We should hopefully be back into the rhythm of things as we keep going. I'm going to be stopping this and recording a game podcast. So we should have the game podcast right after this. Be sure to join us. Thank you for listening.